The early morning air in the northern woods bit into my skin, a sharp reminder of the unforgiving wilderness that surrounded my farm. My name is Jack, and my cabin sits at the edge of the forest, nestled between towering pines that sway with the wind. Snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the land in an eerie, silent stillness. The world outside seemed frozen in time, the only sounds being the distant caw of ravens and the crunch of snow beneath my boots as I made my way across the porch. I've always felt connected to this land. My family has farmed here for generations, a life that demands patience, hard work, and a quiet acceptance of nature's rhythms. I've learned to rise with the dawn, to prepare for the long winters, and to endure the harsh conditions with a resilience born of necessity. This morning, as I checked the grain silos and started my chores, there was an undercurrent of unease in the air. The usual stillness was tinged with something else, something more desperate. As I filled the bird feeder, I felt it, an unspoken tension that seemed to cling to the air around me. Something was wrong. The silence stretched too long. I had just finished gathering firewood when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy, labored breathing coming from the direction of my porch. My heart skipped a beat. My eyes darted to the weathered wooden steps, half covered in snow, and that's when I saw it. A massive bear, its fur matted with ice and its eyes glazed with exhaustion, was slumped against the corner of the porch. Its once powerful frame seemed frail, its ribs heaving as it fought for breath. The creature's fur, a dull brown with streaks of snow, was damp and stiff from the frigid temperatures. It barely seemed to notice my presence as it collapsed, completely drained. I froze, my hand tightening instinctively around the axe handle still gripped in my hand. Bears weren't uncommon in these parts, but this sight, it was beyond unusual. The farm was far from any known bear dens, and to see one this close to my home in the dead of winter, something was terribly wrong. The bear's eyes flicked up toward me, a mix of fear and desperation in its gaze. It was almost as though the bear knew it had reached the end of its strength and had nowhere else to turn. A wave of shock surged through me. My first instinct was to retreat. Bears were dangerous, especially when in distress or wounded. A cornered animal could lash out unpredictably, and I knew better than anyone that survival in these woods was a ruthless battle. But this bear, in its current state, didn't look dangerous. It looked broken, and something inside me stirred, a deep, familiar pull. I knew this creature wasn't here to harm me. It was simply hungry, desperate, maybe even on the brink of death. My mind raced. The bear was too far gone. I knew I couldn't just turn my back, but the question of what I should do hung over me like a storm cloud. Bears were not domesticated animals. They were wild creatures. Any attempt to approach it to offer food could be met with aggression, or worse. And yet the desperation in the bear's eyes, those same eyes that were now slowly closing as it sagged further into the snow, tugged at my heart. The wind had picked up, whistling through the trees in a mournful cry. The temperature had already dropped below freezing, and the snowflakes danced violently around us, biting and cutting. The harsh cold would take the bear soon if it didn't find shelter or warmth. I could see the shiver that ran through the bear's body, feel the wild desperation that clung to the air between us. It wasn't just hunger. This was an animal fighting to survive. I stepped closer, my boots crunching softly in the snow, hesitant and unsure. The bear barely moved, but its ears twitched as if it was still aware of my presence. I could see the bloodshot whites of its eyes, hear the labored, wheezing breaths it was taking. My chest tightened. There was no mistaking it now. The bear was starving, and it had likely been scavenging for food in these woods for days. I glanced quickly at my barn. The animals were tucked in for the night. I was alone here. No one would be able to help me if things went wrong. The thought of entering the barn and leaving the bear here to die in its suffering gnawed at me. But was I willing to risk my own safety for the life of a bear? A wild animal that could turn on me at any moment? The internal battle raged within me. I had always respected the wild, had always adhered to the rules of the forest. Never approach an injured predator. But this was different. There was something deeply human in the way the bear was looking at me, something I couldn't just ignore. It was almost as if the animal was asking for help, a silent plea that stirred something inside me. Without thinking, I slowly set the axe down on the porch. The heavy wood made a soft thud against the frozen surface. I took another tentative step forward, keeping my movement slow and deliberate, trying to avoid startling the animal. The wind howled, drowning out the steady beat of my heart as I knelt beside the bear. I could see the blood smeared across the porch where the animal had dragged itself. Its front paws trembled as it shifted slightly, as if gathering the strength to stand again, but it didn't have the energy. I felt a deep pang of sorrow. This was a creature fierce and free, now reduced to nothing more than a shadow of itself. And it was here, at my doorstep, asking for help. I didn't hesitate this time. With a careful hand, I reached out to touch the bear's fur, my fingers brushing against its cold, slick coat. The contact sent a jolt through me, but I didn't pull away. I could feel the raggedness in the bear's breaths, the weight of its suffering. "Hang on," I whispered softly, though I knew the bear couldn't understand me. I spoke more to myself, trying to steady my nerves. "I won't leave you." The barn was close, but in the distance, the howling wind carried the sound of a wolf's distant cry, a reminder that the wilderness, despite its beauty, was unforgiving. I glanced back at my cabin. I couldn't leave the bear outside to freeze, to die of hunger or exhaustion, and yet I knew taking it into the barn, into the warmth, would expose both of us to further risk. Could I risk my farm's safety for the sake of this animal? Was I willing to face the moral consequences of stepping into the unknown? The bear shifted again, its body groaning in agony. My heart clenched. What was the right thing to do? My eyes darted to the barn again. I had one choice: to act now before it was too late. The storm was closing in fast, and this animal, this wild thing, had made its way to me. I could feel my pulse racing as I reached for the shovel leaning against the porch railing. My mind was made up. I would take the risk. The bear had nothing left, no energy to run, no strength to survive this brutal winter storm. If I didn't help, it would die here, alone. It was time to break the rules, to cross the line that had always kept me distant from the wild. I gathered the bear gently in my arms, carefully lifting its exhausted body. The cold fur felt like ice beneath my palms, but there was still warmth in the animal's body, and that gave me hope. I staggered toward the barn, every step laden with uncertainty, knowing that my life, my farm, and perhaps even my safety were now in jeopardy. Behind me, the wind howled louder, carrying the weight of the storm. The barn was my sanctuary, but the real question now wasn't about the barn. It was about whether I could live with the consequences of saving this creature, or whether I had already crossed a line that would change everything. The bear's breaths were shallow and uneven as we reached the barn. I had made my choice, but the storm was only just beginning. The barn door creaked open, its old hinges groaning in protest. I pushed it with all my strength, heart hammering in my chest. I had only ever seen the inside of the barn through the lens of practicality. Storage for tools, hay for the animals, a safe haven during a storm. But now, it felt different. It felt like a battlefield. Every inch of the barn, every corner, seemed to hold the weight of my decision. I could feel the bear's body heavy in my arms, shivering uncontrollably as I carried it inside. The cold that had settled into its bones was almost contagious. The dim light from a single lantern flickered in the corner, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer with each passing second. I set the bear down gently on a bed of straw near the barn's rear corner, where the warmth from the cabin's heat could creep in. The animal's ragged breaths filled the space, and for a moment I just stood there, watching, unsure of my next move. The bear's eyes flickered open, a weak glance directed at me, filled with confusion and fear. I swallowed hard. I couldn't ignore the animal's pain. It was too raw, too immediate. But even more pressing was the gnawing question that had been clawing at me since I first saw the bear on my porch. What was I doing? The bear could turn on me. It could attack me the moment it regained its strength. I knew the risk. I understood that helping this creature could end in disaster. Wild animals had no understanding of kindness, only survival. And I was no fool. I knew how dangerous an injured bear could be. Yet my heart ached as I watched the animal struggle, its eyes pleading with me as if begging for mercy. But mercy could be a dangerous thing. I had crossed the line, stepped over the boundary I had always respected. The wilderness had rules, rules that could not be ignored, or else it would punish you. I knew that. And yet I couldn't bring myself to let the bear die alone in the snow, suffering from hunger and exhaustion. Would I really just turn my back on this creature? I took a step back, pacing in the tight space of the barn, my boots crunching against the straw. The wind howled louder outside and the storm intensified. The light from the lantern flickered again, casting a dim glow over the barn. As I paced, my mind raced through the possibilities, the consequences. If the bear recovered, would it return to its wild nature, to its fight for survival? Would it be more dangerous for both of us when it regained its strength? Could I really trust that the bear would just leave once it was healed? Or worse, what if the bear never left? My mind split in two directions. One side told me that nature would be better left to its course. The bear was part of the wild, and the wild had its own way of balancing things out. The storm was a natural force. The bear's hunger was a result of its struggle to survive in harsh conditions. Who was I to interfere? The other side, the side I was struggling to silence, told me that this bear's suffering was not just a part of the wild's brutality, it was a choice. I could choose compassion. I could choose to break the rules, even if it meant taking a risk, even if it meant standing between the bear and the storm, between the animal's suffering and a hard, cold death. I stopped pacing and looked back at the bear. It lay there in the straw, its body trembling as it let out a soft, pained groan. The bear's chest heaved and its breathing was shallow, its ribs visible beneath the fur. My heart twisted. This bear was not a monster. It was not the wild creature that would one day tear my life apart. It was a mother, a fighter, broken, exhausted, desperate. And in that moment, it was a living being who needed help, not a threat. I crouched down beside the bear, studying its limp form. The storm outside raged, but inside the barn the air was thick with tension, suffused with a sense of urgency that mirrored my own internal battle. I reached out slowly, the warmth of my hand a small comfort against the coldness of the barn. I carefully touched the bear's fur, letting my fingers gently trace its back. It was still warm, a flicker of life beneath the exhaustion. "I can help you," I whispered, though I knew the bear wouldn't understand my words. "I won't leave you to die here. You're not alone." But even as I spoke, my doubts gnawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if I was making a terrible mistake? The reality of what I was doing crashed down on me like a falling tree. I was not just risking my own safety, but the safety of the farm, my livelihood. If this bear recovered and became aggressive, it could ruin everything. The barn, the livestock, the peace I had fought so hard to maintain. What if I couldn't control the consequences? A low growl broke my thoughts, and for a split second my heart stopped. The bear's eyes flickered open, and it locked onto me, a deep rumble coming from its throat. But it wasn't the growl of aggression, it was the sound of fear. The bear, too, was torn, caught between instinct and the need for comfort. It was a vulnerable animal, torn between the wild and the uncertainty of survival. I held my breath, motionless. The bear shifted, its muscles twitching, and I thought for a moment that it might attack, but it didn't. Instead, it let out another weak groan and lowered its head back to the straw. A sigh of relief escaped my lips. For the first time, I realized that the danger wasn't immediate. The bear wasn't a threat, not yet. It wasn't even capable of being one right now. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't wait anymore. My decision had been made, whether I liked it or not. I was already in the depths of it, facing the consequences, and I would stand by the choice I had made. I had to act. I stepped away from the bear, moving quickly but carefully. I gathered some hay and piled it near the animal to create a barrier, a place of comfort. I made a makeshift shelter, ensuring the bear would stay warm in the worst of the storm, but then I hesitated. I had the resources. I could give the bear food, grains, meat scraps, but I didn't want to risk being too close. I could provide the warmth of the barn, the protection from the storm, but what about the bear's instincts? I glanced at the door of the barn, my mind racing once again. There was no turning back now. I reached for the food in the corner, grabbing whatever scraps I could find. Slowly, cautiously, I placed the food near the bear, but not too close. The bear lifted its head again, sniffing the air. Its nostrils flared, and for a long moment it seemed uncertain. Then, almost hesitantly, it crawled closer to the food, its movement slow and stiff, still recovering from its ordeal. The barn was silent save for the rustling of the bear as it began to eat. I breathed out in relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. The bear, though still fragile, was showing signs of recovery. I had chosen compassion, had chosen to break the rules, and in this moment, I understood something important. Compassion was not weakness, it was strength. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the barn, the bear was no longer alone. Neither was I. As the storm raged on, I sat down across from the bear, keeping a safe distance. I wasn't sure how things would unfold, but I had made the right choice. The consequences, whatever they may be, could no longer overshadow the one thing I had the power to give: a second chance. Days passed, and the bear slowly regained its strength. I watched in awe as it transformed from a desperate, dying creature to a majestic force of nature. Its eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now shone with a renewed vigor. The bear's coat, once matted and lifeless, began to regain its luster. With each passing day, I saw the wild spirit within it reawaken. As the bear recovered, I found myself drawn to its resilience. This creature had faced death, had dragged itself through a merciless storm to find help. It had defied the odds, fought against nature itself, and emerged victorious. In its struggle, I saw a reflection of the human spirit, the will to survive, to push on when all hope seems lost. The bond between us grew, tentative and fragile at first, but strengthening with each day. I never forgot the potential danger, always maintaining a respectful distance, but I couldn't deny the connection I felt to this magnificent animal. We had both taken a risk. The bear in seeking help from a human, and I in offering aid to a wild creature. Together, we had rewritten the rules of our coexistence. Weeks turned into months, and spring began to stir in the air. The bear, now fully recovered, began to show signs of restlessness. I knew our time together was coming to an end.